Imagine a narrow country lane in the Belgian Ardennes, late summer 1944. The air is thick with the scent of cut hay and distant guns. A slender girl in a faded blue dress pedals a black bicycle along the dusty road. She is 19 years old. Her name is Andrée De Jongh, though today she answers only to the codename Dede. Beneath the simple wicker basket on her handlebars, and inside the hollow steel frame of her bicycle, lie 25 pounds of high explosive, enough to tear an armored train into twisted metal and fire. One German checkpoint lies between her and the sabotage team waiting in the forest. One careless soldier's hand on the frame, one suspicious glance at the unnaturally heavy bicycle, and the war ends for her in a ditch with a bullet in the back of the neck. Yet she sings softly as she rides, a Walloon lullaby her mother taught her, because singing keeps the fear from shaking her legs off the pedals. The sun is low, the shadows long, and every turn of the wheels brings her closer to the bridge that must fall tonight, if the Allied advance is to keep its momentum after Normandy. This is not the first time she has carried death in her bicycle. It will not be the last. But this journey, 70 miles across, occupied Belgium with the Gestapo hunting the legendary Comet Line escape network she leads, is the one that will decide whether thousands of downed airmen reach home, or whether the girl who became a legend at 19 will vanish into the anonymity of an unmarked grave. 3 months earlier, Andrée De Jongh had never killed anyone. She had never even held a gun. She was a shy art student from Brussels, the daughter of a school headmaster, who spent her evenings sketching flowers in the botanical gardens. When the Germans marched in during May 1940, she felt only numbness, then shame at her own helplessness. The reversal came on a rainy night in 1941, when 2 British airmen, soaked and starving, knocked on her family's door. Her father opened it. Andrée watched her gentle, bookish father transform in an instant into a man willing to risk everything for strangers. That night she carried soup to the attic where the airmen hid, and when one of them took her hand and whispered, "Thank you for giving us back our lives," something inside her broke open. Innocence died quietly in that attic. In its place rose a cold, clear fury at the occupier who turned her country into a prison, fury at herself for ever believing the world could stay gentle. From that evening forward, the soft girl who loved watercolors became the most wanted woman in Belgium, a name spoken with terror by the Gestapo and with awe by every resistance cell from Brussels to the Pyrenees. By the summer of 1944, the tide of the war had turned decisively. The Allies had stormed ashore at Normandy on the 6th of June, and the German armies in France were reeling backward. Yet in Belgium, the occupation remained iron-hard. The Gestapo and the Wehrmacht still controlled every road, every railway, every village square. To keep their retreating divisions supplied, the Germans relied desperately on the rail network that threaded the Ardennes south toward Luxembourg and the Reich. One vital artery was the double-tracked line that crossed the River Auth over a high steel bridge near the village of Hotten. If that bridge fell, an entire panzer division would be stranded without fuel or ammunition for days the Allies could use to punch through the Siegfried Line before winter. Belgian resistance groups received urgent orders from London. The Hotten Bridge must be destroyed before the 15th of September. Plastic explosive, detonators and timers were parachuted into a forest clearing near Liège. Someone had to carry them 70 miles south through a countryside crawling with patrols, flying checkpoints, and SS Hunter squads searching for the woman the Germans now called Die Schwarze Katze, the Black Cat, who had already guided more than 400 Allied airmen to safety along the Comet escape line. The only person judged calm enough, fluent enough in German, and familiar enough with every back road, was Andrée De Jongh herself. She had been arrested once already in January 1943 near the Spanish border, betrayed by a double agent. She had endured interrogation in Fresnes prison, survived Ravensbrück and Mauthausen concentration camps through sheer will and luck, and then, impossibly, escaped in April 1945 as the camps crumbled. Freed by the chaos of defeat, she returned to Belgium in July 1944 burning with unfinished business. The bridge at Hotten became her final appointment with destiny. A typical day for Andrée in the late summer of 1944 began long before dawn. She slept fully dressed in a barn loft or a sympathetic farmer's attic, her bicycle hidden under straw. At 3 in the morning she rose, washed her face in cold water from a bucket, and ate a slice of coarse bread with a smear of lard. Then came the ritual of loading the bicycle. The hollow frame had been specially modified in a Brussels workshop. A thin steel tube ran inside the down tube and seat tube, packed tight with slabs of pale yellow plastic explosive, wrapped in oilskin. Detonators the size of lipstick tubes were taped inside the handlebar grips. A false bottom in the wicker basket held forged papers identifying her as Marie Dubois, commercial traveller in sewing notions. Over it all, she arranged real packets of needles and thread. Any searcher who opened the basket saw only the harmless trade of a travelling seamstress. She wore no makeup. A pretty face drew attention. Instead, she rubbed a little soot beneath her eyes to look tired and ordinary. At 4:30, she wheeled the heavy bicycle down a cart track and began pedalling south. The first 20 miles were the worst, flat, open country, where German convoys roared past in clouds of dust. Whenever she heard engines, she dismounted, pretended to adjust her skirt, and let the trucks thunder by. At each checkpoint, she smiled the small, stupid smile of a country girl, handed over papers that had cost 3 lives to forge, and prayed the sentry would not notice the bicycle's unnatural weight. Sometimes they made her lift it over the barrier. She did, muscles burning, face blank. By noon she reached the forested hills. Here the roads narrowed and climbed. She pushed more than she rode, sweat soaking the cotton dress that clung to her back. In tiny villages, she stopped at safe houses, whose owners risked execution for a cup of ersatz coffee and 30 minutes of rest. Children stared at the quiet young woman with the intense dark eyes, who spoke so softly yet carried herself like a soldier. Farmers' wives pressed apples and cheese into her basket without asking questions. At dusk she reached the deep woods south of Marche-en-Famenne. There she met the sabotage team, 4 men with blackened faces and Sten guns, who took the explosives from her trembling hands as if receiving holy relics. She never stayed to watch the explosion. Her job was delivery. By midnight she was pedaling north again, lighter now, the empty frame rattling slightly, as if the bicycle itself felt relief. She reached Brussels at dawn, hid the bicycle in a different barn, and slept for 4 hours before beginning the cycle again. This was her life for weeks on end, 70 miles south with death in the tubes, 70 miles north with silence in her heart. Each journey stripped another layer from the girl who had once drawn flowers. The first time she carried explosives, she vomited behind a hedge, convinced the package would detonate if she hit a pothole. By the 10th journey, fear had calcified into something harder than courage, into duty, so absolute it no longer consulted her emotions. She no longer dreamed of art school or marriage or children. She dreamed only of roads, of the weight distribution on the pedals, of the exact tone of voice that made a German sentry wave her through. Yet beneath the iron discipline something else grew, a vast aching love for every airman she had guided to Spain, for every Jewish child she had hidden, for the Belgium that would one day wake from this nightmare. She discovered she could hate with perfect clarity and love with perfect clarity at the same moment. When news reached her that a safe house had been raided and the family shot, she allowed herself exactly 1 minute to weep, tears falling onto the map she was memorizing, then folded the grief away like a letter she would read after the war. The transformation reached its deepest point on the night of the 12th of September 1944. She was stopped at a checkpoint near Rochefort by an SS officer who ordered her to empty the basket. Thread and needles spilled onto the road. He kicked them, suspicious. Then he grasped the bicycle frame to lift it. Time slowed. Andrée felt the blood drain from her heart. In that instant she understood she was prepared to die. Not in some abstract heroic sense, but right now, on this patch of moonlit tarmac, if it meant the bridge would still fall. The officer's fingers tightened on the tube. She looked straight into his eyes and began to recite, in perfect German, a poem by Goethe she had learned at school. Something about the beauty of the Belgian landscape made him pause. He laughed suddenly, called her ein komisches Mädchen, and waved her on. She pedaled away steadily, but inside she was reborn. Fear had finally been burned out of her. What remained was a weapon forged in the shape of a 19-year-old girl. On the night of the 14th of September 1944, the Houghton Bridge rose above the Alpha like a black spiderweb against the stars. At 2:17, a series of muffled thumps echoed through the valley. Orange fire blossomed beneath the central span, followed by the screaming tear of steel. The bridge folded in on itself and plunged into the river in a roar of steam and splintered timber. 36 hours later, Allied tanks rolled across the temporary Bailey Bridge. Engineers threw up downstream. The German counterattack stalled for lack of fuel. The road to the Rhine lay open. Andrée heard the explosion from 20 miles away while drinking acorn coffee in a forester's cottage. She closed her eyes for the first time in days and permitted herself one trembling breath of relief. The war ended for her not in May 1945, with the crowds in Brussels, but in that single moment when she knew the package she had carried through 9 checkpoints and 70 miles of terror had done its work. The girl who had once been afraid to speak to strangers had become the decisive instrument that helped crack Hitler's Western Front. When liberation finally came, Andrée De Jongh walked back into Brussels on foot, anonymous among the cheering crowds. The bicycle was gone, abandoned in a ditch weeks earlier, when the frame finally cracked under the strain. She weighed barely 90 pounds. Her hair had been crudely shorn to combat lice during her previous imprisonment. Now it grew back in uneven black curls. Medals were pressed upon her, the George Cross from Britain, the Légion d'honneur from France, the Order of Leopold from her own king. She accepted them politely and put them away in a drawer. Former airmen travelled from Canada and New Zealand to shake her hand and weep. She smiled the same distant smile she had used on German sentries, and changed the subject. For years she refused interviews. The war had taught her that words were dangerous. Silence kept people alive. She returned to art, studying painting in Brussels, and later working as a nurse in leper colonies in the Congo and Ethiopia, places where courage was still needed daily, but where no one asked her about bridges or bicycles. Only in the evenings when she sat alone with a cup of real coffee did the memories surface, the weight in the frame, the taste of dust, the SS officer's fingers inches from discovery. She never spoke of them aloud. Andrée De Jongh died in 2007 at the age of 90, still quiet, still fierce. In the end, the girl who carried 25 pounds of explosive in a bicycle frame taught us something deeper than heroism. She showed that the most ordinary among us, a shy student who loved flowers, can become the hinge on which history turns when conscience refuses to stay small. She never saw herself as extraordinary. She simply believed that when evil occupies your home, you do not wait for heroes. You become the hero the moment demands, even if all you have is a battered bicycle and a heart that has learned to outpedal fear. Her story whispers a hard and luminous truth. The difference between bystander and savior is often no more than the decision to keep pedaling when every rational voice screams to stop. In an age that still produces tyrants and checkpoints, her wheels still turn somewhere in the dark, reminding us that courage is not the absence of terror, but the refusal to let terror have the final word.